paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
You can call me Roland or you can call me Fakir. It's not too hard once you get used to it.
Fakir.
He was a Sufi mystic that was misunderstood about using piercing as a way of opening your consciousness. His name was Fakir Musafar. And I never intended to use that other than in this tattoo convention. And somehow it stuck.
He had a tendency between visual art, spirit, body, and sexuality, that everything flowed or could flow from one to the other, that there was no real separation.
He really started owning that title, performance artist. We were making art through our bodies.
Whips are getting pulled out and people are getting flogged, and like the thing is, none of this was a cliche yet. Like the 90s hadn't happened yet.
And then AIDS took so many of our people away.
Because of these experiences, I've actually been able to see and feel what it's like on the other side.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with Angelo Madsen all about his new film, A Body to Live In. It's a documentary film all about Fakir Musafar. If you're unfamiliar with that name, you might have seen him in the old research book, Modern Primitives. It is a wonderful, fascinating documentary. I love the way that it's put together. Really enjoyed this one. I would highly recommend it to folks to check out. Maybe not for the faint of heart, but gosh, what is? Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy this interview.
I absolutely loved your documentary. Definitely want to talk to you about that, but I'd like to know a little bit more about you and how you decided to get into filmmaking, because you've done art exhibitions, installations, music, film. You're like quite a talented person.
Thanks. I couldn't make a decision. That's how I got into it. Always gravitated towards the arts, visual arts, writing, and music. So visual arts and music were my big things. I was not interested in film at all until I went to college, and I went to art school, and I thought I was going to be a painter. And then I discovered sound art, which is something I'd never learned about. And then I discovered video art, and I was totally smitten with those practices. And I had never even heard of them before. And so once I stumbled upon those, I was kind of like, oh, this is what I got to do. I pivoted. I still was in lots of music projects and bands, put out records, toured, but really started getting interested in films. And then I also was doing DIY film projects and started working for a nonprofit where I was doing films with other people as well, developed more skills there. Yeah, that's how it started. I never actually went to film school. My work really comes from the language of music and the language of visual art.
The language that you use in A Body to Live In, I love the aesthetic of it. There's always something happening. You really feel the film as a medium. Did that come from you, or did that come from the materials that you were able to gather?
Both. I like to think that the film will tell you what it wants to be. And there were a few clips that I was just so interested in. I wanted to create an environment around them. And they didn't really, often what happens when you like approach a film with a structure in mind is like you use that a structure until it no longer works for you, and then you abandon it, and then you do something else, right? There was a few clips that used live overlays And I really liked those. And so I started thinking about how I wanted to use overlays and how I wanted to think about negative space and how I wanted to think about the history of photography also. So trying to let the history and the materiality kind of guide the aesthetic. I was thinking particularly about like negatives and reversals. So like when you develop photos, you have negatives. That's part of the practice. So how can I integrate the idea of the negative into an aesthetic worldview, or create an aesthetic universe that integrates this idea of the negative, also integrates the idea of the still image. So that's why you get this sort of like more stop motion movement instead of like animation or flicker. The idea is like for you to actually remember that the moving image is a still image too.
How did you find out about your subject? How familiar were you with this person before you started this endeavor?
I was both very familiar and also very limited. I had met him in 2003 and got to know him kind of slowly over a span of years, and felt like when I started the project, I felt like I knew about him. And after a lot more learning, I was like, oh, I only knew a little bit, which I think is true of any situation where you dive fully into someone's history. You only know the tip of the iceberg. It was a crazy, fascinating time getting to sift through this material and experience it. The research part is actually one of my favorite parts of any project. Research and post, my favorite parts. But yeah, I had seen the research publication when I was in my teens, I think, in a friend's house. But I didn't know, when I met Fakir in 2003, I didn't actually know that was the same person, because he was 20 years later, and I'm not going around looking for, whatever, this random artist. And then later on, my friends was like, oh, that's the person from, the magazine. I was like, oh, crap, cool. And then I got one of his monographs. My good friend was collaborating with his wife on a project, and she brought home the monograph, and it was stunning. It was hundreds of beautiful portraits spanning from 1944 to 2000 or something. And I was just like totally blown away by the portraits, not by the like fetishy erotica, which is only like one piece of the puzzle with him, but by the photographs themselves. He came to see one of my films in 2017, and we had a really good conversation afterwards. And at that point, I started thinking about if it might be possible to do something with him, and then he passed away. And then I sort of picked the conversation back up with Cleo.
Tell me about the archives, because yeah, you're talking about the research and just the amount of material you were able to find, the audio interviews, the film clips, the photographs. What was that like, getting your hands on some of that? And was it all already archived, or did you have to start searching every place?
Fakir documented most of his stuff very meticulously, and he kept a lot. And so that made it very helpful and easy. He was very good with documentation. He also knew he was dying. So the thing he did during that 9 months or so was get his archive in order. So I was really lucky in that a lot of the materials were cataloged and somewhat easy to find. It was also a situation of like, I have a really unique set of interests when I like approached this kind of content, and finding the things that I was interested in that nobody would know to look for, that was the challenge. I wanted to see things that were from the private club. You know what I mean? I was not interested in necessarily like his interview on CNN. There's plenty of those. There's tons of interviews on like TV shows and talk shows and whatever. And those are less interesting to me than some of the things you see, like, the little video that Annie Sprinkle made where he's like dressing up in a corset and tuxedo. You'd only see a clip of that, but that's an hour long, where she just films him dressing up with a tuxedo over his corset. So those things I was really interested in, those things that were buried that nobody had cataloged or found or knew what to do with. And that was at the end of a tape that had been taped over. And so a lot of things I found that I was really excited about were things that were miscatalogued or were at the ends of tapes. Because those are the things that I think he and Cleo thought were like less important in his archive than like the photographs, the interviews, the more straightforward things. I also was really interested in the poems because no one knew that about him. And I was trying to bring out these textures of his personality that you wouldn't see in interviews with the media or in reels he had made for advertising things or whatever.
This is going to be a weird compliment, but I love the title of the film, A Body to Live In.
Oh, thanks.
And just this idea of like our bodies being this kind of transitory thing, and just the way that he affected and manipulated his own body as his art and as his life just meant so much as I was watching this.
I was trying to figure out a title and I didn't know what to do. And I'm thinking. And he used to like to say, body is the door to spirit. That was one of his little phrases. Body is the door to spirit. He would say other things, other little sayings he had that were kind of adjacent to that. The idea of a door to me was a too literal of a word. And so I didn't want the word door in my title. I was like, that's not going to land. That doesn't land for me, you know? How can I approach that same concept as a little collection of words that do something powerful together and still open to the same idea? And so that was kind of where I landed.
And then I imagine, did you do all the music for this as well?
I did. Yeah, I love doing music. I will say I had great samples to work from, and that does a tremendous amount of work. So like Jessica Vaughn's violin work was really central to that. My friend from high school's baritone saxophone work was amazing, which we recorded in my bedroom. Marcia Bassett, sound artist. Pauline Oliveros. I don't know if you know anything about Pauline Oliveros, but she was a really important figure in the sound art universe, but as it overlapped with realms of the study of consciousness, she had this whole approach called deep listening, which is basically about trancing out with sound. And so I was really excited to be able to use some for accordion pieces. And then same with other films, like if I'm using work by other artists, I can really only use it if they give me free reign. I have to be able to cut it the way I want to cut it, remix it, even like maybe re-record pieces or weave in new recordings with it. So as long as I'm allowed free reign on remixes, I can use it. And they allowed it, and it was great. And her work is all archived at a place called the Ministry of Matt in upstate New York. But I think the two of them would have so much to talk about and shared so many similar interests, and it felt really special to be able to put them in post-mortem conversation.
How many people did you interview for this?
Not that many. I kept it pretty close to his collaborators, his field collaborators. I think there's 8 people in the film, and then there's 2 others that were interviewed that were not featured in the film, or 3 actually. And those were unfortunate because they're awesome. They're just like amazing interviews and amazing figures and so much of their own rich artistry and life story. And that was true of the other interviews too, obviously. Like it's just really hard to narrow down content like that. But I just couldn't figure out good placement in context of everyone else.
Yeah.
So those hit the floor. One of them got made into a 2-channel installation, actually, piece that's showing at the One Archives in LA this weekend. And so it wasn't a total loss. I still got to make something with it. And then, some interviews I did once and some interviews I did like 6 times, A lot of them I did twice. Most of them I did twice. But yeah, so 10, 11. And then, the interview material that was archival was insanely extensive.
What was your relationship like with Cleo as you're making this?
Cleo is a very strong personality, and I'm also a very strong personality, I think. Sometimes I'm like, who am I? I don't know. I think I'm a very strong personality when it comes to like artistry and decisions. And so, it was a dance. It was a delicate dance. And it was also, she was still in really, really deep grief when we started because it was like quite soon after his death. And she really likes to have her hands in everything. And I'm a pretty internal person in my working process. So it was new for me to be guided through an archive in this way. And then once our relationship solidified and we developed our banter, our style of communication developed, it got really easy. And once she started sort of seeing where my interests were, it got even easier. So, I think she's very protective of the archive, rightly so, because she doesn't want people misrepresenting the work. And so, it was a situation where it was like me being like, here's what I'm interested in. She's very smart. So like, you could just tell her like complex shit and she's on board with you, you know? So like, I was just like, look, nobody wants to watch a film where I just worship a guy. That's boring. If you don't allow me to really portray his flaws, this isn't going to work. I'm not trying to put it in a bad light or whatever, you know? It's just like, it all can't be enlightened embodiment, and it all wasn't. And she's very responsive to like thoughts that make sense. It was a lot of give and take. I will say at the end of the day, she saw the rough cut and she had one thing she wanted changed, which I changed, and it was a very easy ask. She had one thing she wanted changed that I said no to. And I was able to explain to her why that felt important to me, and she understood. At the end of the day, there was no resistance whatsoever over what this film became. It just took time for us to build our collaborative relationship and the way we understood each other, because like strong personalities, we just had to like figure out how do we think together. And she was instrumental. You know, the film could not have been made without her. And she gave me everything. She gave me everything I could want. You know, she gave me things that she felt insecure about giving me, you know, and which I put in a special file called double check. There's a special file for all the things that she's like, I feel concerned about giving this to you. I don't know. She's not credited as a producer, but she's doing a lot of producing work, you know, like in terms of like getting me access to things, getting me contacts, getting me resources. She's doing a ton of producing work. And, you know, that's the kind of like behind the scenes stuff that a lot of times people who are participating in documentaries or subjects in documentaries don't get credit for that kind of stuff.
How did the pandemic affect you?
Oh, God. We got screwed. Lost about $8,000. We had two different rests. Actually, I almost threw in the towel on the project, which would have been devastating. But basically, our first round of production was fully scheduled for April 2020. That was the first full round of production. So we had 10 days in LA, 10 days in San Francisco. We had a cinematographer. We had all Airbnbs booked. We had flights booked. We had our interview schedule was half locked. Archive research trips were, we lost a lot in that situation. And so that got canceled, obviously. And then took a breather. I finished my other film, North by Current. I was okay, it's fine. I need to finish this other film anyway. I'm going to push it out. And we'll come back to this film as soon as North by Current is out on its journey. Spring 2021 rolls around. Delta wave hits. Everything's shut down again. Again, we had 10 days in LA, 10 days in San Francisco. Fully booked in March 21. And at that point in time, Airbnb wasn't doing refunds anymore. We lost a lot of money there. It sounds like petty to be like, it was expensive, but basically the pandemic kind of screwed me for starting the film. You know, I had like $20,000 to start with, you know, and I was like, okay, we're going to run with this, figure it out. Like, we'll get money as we can. And basically it was gone before it started. So I was really disappointed and disheartened. And then got back on the saddle, had some extra money come through. I'm really lucky with the Catapult Film Fund and Left Foundation often are like first in on my projects, and it's really grateful for them. But we were able to reschedule, and we were scheduled for August 2021, and that was our first round of production.
Where can people see some of your other films? Because I was looking for North by Current because it sounds great.
North by Current is an interesting one. It's about my family, so it's a very personal film. And my niece and nephews are in it, and they're about to become teenagers at this point. And I just had different feelings about how I wanted that film disseminated in the world than when I made it. The problem to me is not that it's a personal film. I don't mind my personal life being out there, but it's a shared personalness. It's my relationship with my sister, my relationship with my niece and nephews, and it was important to do at the time we did it. It came out in 2021. It played on PBS. Grasshopper is the distributor for that film, so it can be rented for institutions or libraries through Grasshopper. So it's available for libraries or community groups. It's just not available to individuals, and that's partially just that things change.
Tell me about A Body to Live In. Where is that available, or what's the next step for this film?
A Body to Live In has spent the last year doing film festival screenings, which has been exciting, and now it is entering its theatrical distribution with Altered Innocence, which is a deal that I'm very, very excited about. Been following Altered Innocence for the last 10 years. Very much appreciate the quality of work that they distribute and the breadth of it and its specificity at the same time. There's a lot of breadth, but there's like a lot of specificity, but it feels niche in a way that feels important to me. And so I think it's kind of a dream fit. So we'll be in LA this week for a week, and then next week we'll be in New York for a week. And then the week after that, New Orleans for a week. And then we have lots of little one-offs here and there. A couple days, 3 days in Seattle, a day in Portland, Oregon, a day in Portland, Maine, a day in San Francisco. Probably a day in Austin. Just one-off events going on. But there is a special edition Blu-ray coming out that will be on Amazon next week. People can pre-order, and it's going to have lots of behind-the-scenes stuff, which I'm very excited about, including cut interviews. And it's going to have a really beautiful photo log so people can view unseen photographs from the film.
Mr. Madsen, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate this.
Nice talking to you, Mike.